Continue from where we left off in the previous video, where we looked at steps 11 to 20. Now in this one, we're going to look at step 21 all the way to step 30. So let's get started. Step 21, keeping in mind best practices for form inputs, give each input an appropriate type and name attribute. Okay, then give the first input a placeholder attribute. Okay, so the way we want to do that is, first of all, we want to give each input an appropriate type. So let's give this one a type of text, and we'll do the same for this also. Text. Let me just copy it. The second one will have a type of email, not text. Email. And the third one will have a type of date. Yeah, it should be date. So for the first input, we also want to give it a placeholder attribute. Okay, so we have a placeholder, and let's give it a value of, let's say, your name. All right. Oh, I forgot the name attribute. So let's give it also a name attribute. So we'll say name. You can say student. Name. We do the same for the second input. We can say student email, and finally let's do the same for the third input. Let's say student or date of birth. All right. Okay, so for step 22, even though you added a placeholder to the first input element in the previous lesson, this is actually not a best practice for accessibility. Too often, users confuse the placeholder text with an actual input value. They think there is already a value there. So as you can see, with this one, we have a placeholder text which say example Quincy Larson. So it's not an accessibility best practice. So what we want to do is we want to remove the placeholder text from the first input element and rely on the label being the best practice. Okay, so we are going to take off the placeholder attribute like so. Okay. Now for step 23, arguably DOB is not descriptive enough. Yeah, so we have DOB here, and that is definitely not descriptive enough. So what we want to do is we want to write it out. So instead of DOB, we want to actually write it out to make it more descriptive, especially for visually impaired users. So one way to get around such an issue without having to add visible text to the label is to add text only a screen reader can read. Okay, so we want to append a span with the class of SR to the current text content of the third label. Okay, so this is the third label. Okay, so for the text content, we want to append a span element. So let's just say span like so, and want to give this span a class. The value of that class will be SR only. SR stands for screen reader. And then what we want to do is append a spanner element to the class SR only to the current text content of the third label element. Okay. All right. So now in step 24, what we want to do is within the span element, we want to add a text date of birth. Okay. So let's do this. Now what this means is that date of birth. Okay, what this means is that this will be read out by screen readers. Okay, so that people who are visually impaired may know that this input is asking for dates of birth. Okay, the SR only text is still visible, and this is a common pattern to hide text for only screen readers to read. Okay, so we want to make this SR only text here invisible. So the pattern is to set the CSS property to these ones we have here. So we just select the SR only class. Okay, and let's just copy this. Okay, so as you can see, the SR only text is no longer visible for us to see. Okay, so the next step we want to do is with the second session element. So this session element is for HTML question block. Now, we want to begin by adding two div elements. So let's add the first div element. And then we'll also add a second div element. Okay. So add two div elements with a class of question block. So each div is going to have a class, and the value of the class is going to be question block. So question block like this. So I'm just going to copy and paste this right here. Okay. Then within each div of question block element, we want to add one P element, and that P element is going to have a text of incrementing numbers, and we're going to start at 1. So let's do it like so. So the first one here is going to have a P element. So we have our opening P tag and our closing P tag. And then we want to give it a text starting at 1. So let's just copy this and paste it here. And the value of this will be 2 instead of 1. And we also want to add one field set element with a class of question. So let's add a field set element, opening field set tag, and then a closing field set tag. And we want to give it a class property. The value of that class property in this case is going to be question. So since it's the same thing that we'll be doing for the next one, we can just copy it and paste it under the second P tag, like so. All right, so that passes. So for each field set, we want it to contain a true or false question. Okay, so within each field set, what we want to do is we want to nest one legend element. And so let's start by first nesting the legend element inside the field set element. So we have our opening legend tag and then a closing legend tag. Okay, so for the field set, after nesting one legend element, what we want to do is we want to also add one UL element with two options. Okay, so let's have a UL element like so, and then we give it two options. So in other words, we need two li elements. So we have our first li element, and then we can just copy and paste it to create the second li element. Okay, let's do the same thing for the next field set. All right, so that works. So what we want to do next is to give each of the field set an adequate name attribute, and then give both unordered list a class of answers list, right? So for the first field set, let's give it a name attribute, and I'm just going to call this first question. And let's do the same for the second field set as well. And I'm going to call this second question. You can call it anything you want. I'm just going to make it simple and call it first question and then second question. Okay, so for the unordered list, we want to give them a class of answers list. So this is the first one. It's going to have a class of answers dash list. Again, I'm just going to copy this here and paste it for the second one since it's the same thing. All right, finally, we want to use the legend to caption the contents of the field set, and the way we are going to do that is by placing a true or false question as the text content. So you can use any question. I'll say is HTML the same as CSS? And I'll say the full meaning, or let me just give something simple. Is CSS the same as JavaScript? You can use any question that you want for the text contents. Okay, so yeah, so as you can see, we've been given a better question to use, which is way better than what I used initially. All right, so to provide the functionality of the true or false questions, we need a set of inputs which do not allow both to be selected at the same time. So what we can use for that is what we call the radio input. Okay, so within each label element, we want to nest one input element with the appropriate type. Okay, so where is the label element? So this is our list. We first nest a label element in the list, label like so, and yeah, just one label element. And within each of the label elements, we want to nest an input. Okay, so we want to nest an input element. with the appropriate type. So like I said earlier, the appropriate type we can use in this case is going to be the radio type. So we just give it a type of radio, and we can just copy and paste it for the second one, and that should work. Okay, so I'm just going to do the same thing for this one also. All right, so for the last step in this video, we want to give an ID to all of our radio inputs. And the way we can do that is to link our labels to them. So first, for the first radio input, we want to give it an ID of Q1-A1. Then the second one will be Q1-A2. Then the third one will be Q2-A1, Q2-A2, respectively. So let's get started. So for this is the first radio input. So we just give it an ID, and then the value of that ID will be Q1-A1. So Q1 is question 1-A1. So question 1, answer 1. Then for the second one, we'll give it an ID. The value is going to be Q1, that is question 1-A2. All right, so let's go to the third and fourth one. The third one is going to have an ID with a value of Q2-A2. And finally, the fourth one is going to have an ID of Q2-A2. All right, so that is where we'll end it in this one. So in the next one, we are going to look at step 31 all the way to step 40.